Now, I'm reading here, Marc and Cora were born in 4th generation Jehovah's Witness families. That's an extraordinary thing, because that's then very much embedded in your core beliefs. So I was 14. Before that, I'd had a totally normal childhood, whatever normal means. But if you're born into it, when you're learning that the sky is blue and that's a chair and that's a microphone and you shouldn't just run out into the street or a car will knock you down, you're also learning that there's someone in the sky watching you 24/7, and you are special and different, and you need to obey different rules than the other children at school. And all of those other children at school are going to die in a horrendous fiery rain quite soon. But you will live through Armageddon if you follow Jehovah's many complex rules and regulations. So you're constantly living in fear of this. And also, one of the things I would say about the Jehovah's Witnesses is they don't have birthday and Christmas, but lots of different religions have different sorts of celebrations, don't they? So if you don't have Christmas, it's fine. You might have, Diwali, you might have Hanukkah. Jehovah's Witnesses they're just no fun. There's no tradition. Even when I went back to the meeting with Ryan, they changed all the songs. So there's nothing to be sentimental about. There's nothing that makes you feel like this is a community or a culture. So it's hard for children. It's really hard. So I'm very, very fascinated to hear their story as 4th generation Jehovah's Witnesses. Please give a big round of applause for Marc and Cora. Yeah, well, go for it.
We were, as you said, Deborah, we were born in, and both lived very separate lives in separate towns. Our families knew of each other and so forth, but we got on with our lives, etc. And after divorcing, Marc divorced his wife many years ago. I divorced my husband through him leaving me when I was 3 months pregnant, which I won't go into too much, apart from the fact he was the presiding overseer's son, and it was a big no-no, but there you go.
Presiding overseer, by the way, is the chap who runs the congregation. He's sort of like the head elder of the congregation, I think now called the coordinator.
That's right. Yeah.
The godfather.
Yeah, basically. And I moved back to my hometown after divorcing, and with my now born daughter, and was going to live my entire life from that point onwards as a single sister with a baby, because I wasn't allowed to remarry, because I'd divorced on the grounds other than adultery. It was on the grounds of unreasonable conduct, and you cannot divorce and remarry unless you are divorcing on the grounds of adultery, which I couldn't prove had happened, but that's another story. So that Marc and I met, we got married. We wanted to get married, we were told not to, we were told to stay away from each other. We were in love, so we went against the elders and we got married. And we were disfellowshipped for doing that, literally a week after, which meant that nobody in our family or in the congregation could talk to us or associate with us, even though we had brought lots of children together as well. So now there's children involved, and we were all shunned. For 3 years we went back to every single meeting as a couple, sat at the back of the hall with our children, and were shunned by everybody.
You went back for 3 years,
3 years.
to try and get reinstated?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Why did you want to get reinstated?
Because it's the
stubborn.
truth.
And we were also very stubborn.
And we were very stubborn, yes.
Yeah.
But having that 3 years gave us a very interesting point that we could watch it from afar, like a fly on the wall, and not interacting and being love-bombed at every meeting, which is something that people go to the meetings for, that interaction of hugs and hello sister, hello brother, da, da, da. And that is the one thing that people do, it's the connection with people. And when you're not having that, and suddenly you're there watching without having to interact, you start to see things very differently. Even though we weren't aware, I think our waking process started at that point. And then after the 3 years, we got reinstated, and we had to move congregations in order to do so, because our elders were at no point ever going to reinstate us. They were not, because they knew that.
How did you explain this to your children through this time? Did you pray with them? Did you pray before you ate?
No, no. We just kept going to the meetings. We'd kind of almost lost all interest in doing anything Jehovah's Witness related, because we weren't allowed to go on the ministry. You weren't even allowed to carry a blood card or anything, or associate yourself as being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, even though you couldn't interact with the world outside, but you couldn't interact with the Jehovah's Witness world either. So you're kind of in a no man's land. So you end up becoming in a no man's land. You just take on this, well, we don't do anything other than just be a family, go to the meetings, carry on with normal life, and put up with people crossing the road, which included my grandmother, to avoid us. The thing about being reinstated is you have to be repentant. Now, Mark and I have married, and how can you repent for being married? So our attitudes, as they said, we weren't humble in one of our reinstatement sessions that we had. We refused because they said we weren't being humble. We said, well, what can we possibly do that's any different than what we're doing already? We're attending all the meetings, we haven't missed any, we're sitting at the back of the hall, we're not interacting with anyone, our family isn't talking to us. What more can we possibly do? And they said we were in an adulterous marriage. And I had to almost hold Mark down, because how can you ever be not in an adulterous marriage? When somebody's put that label on you, when does it stop becoming or being an adulterous marriage? So he took a dislike to that, and so did I. But after all of that had happened and we were reinstated, the beginning of the meeting, of the meeting that we were reinstated in, everyone was treating us the same way, not talking to us or anything. And the moment where our announcement came, where we were now Marc and Cora in the back as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were love-bombed. And everybody came up, hugged us and everything, and we just thought, but we're no different from the beginning of the meeting to the end of the meeting. We haven't changed. Our attitude hasn't changed. We still love each other. So this is just so balmy. It's just not right. And I think you were waking up way before we'd actually got reinstated, which I didn't realise. Mark was secretly looking at things. I remember Mark did actually buy he bought a book.
It's a secret.
He bought a book, Raymond Franz's book, didn't you? Yeah.
It's all lies and rumours. Yes, a COC, Crisis of Conscience. And I thought I was going to be assassinated when I went into Waterstones and ordered this book. It took weeks to come through. And eventually it did come through, and it's the first time and only time I've actually gone behind my wife's back with something to hide this book. And I hid the book. I hid it well from her. But
I actually helped you hide it, though.
Eventually, when she said, "What are you reading?" Because you caught me a couple of times reading this book. And I
you
said,
just say porn.
Yeah. Oh, that's all right.
It would have been okay.
Hardcore pornography. It's kinky stuff, you don't want to see it. You'll be disappointed.
So anyway, Raymond Franz came into our conversation, and I said, "It's just a book, and his name is Raymond Franz." "Oh," she said, and
I didn't
walked
even
off.
know who he was.
And that's, surprisingly for me, my heart went down a few beats, and I thought, I can read this and open now in my own home. So I did. I started reading this book, and I read it from cover to cover. And then I got the Christian Freedom book, which is Raymond Franz's second book. I read that one too. And then I started delving into the blood issue of Jehovah's Witnesses, because it never seemed quite right what was going on there. Now, all this time, we were going to every single meeting, twice and three, sometimes three. Every single meeting without anybody speaking to us.
The only one we weren't allowed to go to is the book study, because at that time it was still in people's homes.
It was still in people's homes.
And we weren't allowed to enter into a Jehovah's Witness home, because that's...
The slander we went through was incredible by gossiping sisters in particular. The elders let it happen, and we went through some terrible, terrible lies and slander about us, and there's nothing we could do about it. It was designed to try and break us, to stop us from going to the meetings. It was seen as arrogance, as being there. But we attended every single week. But what it did, it galvanized us. I think when you're told on the platform by an elder who's doing a special needs, and he's pointing the finger at the back of the room and telling us that we're unclean, and in front of our children, that we are unclean, and then using the Bible and scriptures to back that up, made me realize then that this was something far more insidious than anything I'd ever been brought up to believe. We'd gone through like an almost baptism of fire. We were seeing this unrepentant, black, dark deception that was now being used against us. And we were being used as an example by the congregation. Not just our congregation, but the other two congregations in our town as well. And boy, oh boy, did they put us through the ringer. But what it did was then the energy that we would have had going out in the ministry and doing the watchtower and studying for this and studying for that. We had all this spare time. So we used it, and we started studying alternative information.
Well, it started with the blood issue, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because Mark approached me one day and said to me, it was when we were trying to get our blood cards back, and it changed at that point from when we were in our disfellowship state to being where you could allow you to have fractions, or fractions of fractions, to be precise. So we were thinking, well, what's a fraction? And they'd had a slight thing on the platform about trying to explain what this was, and it just went over my head. So Mark, being the investigator like he is, he went into medical books and things, trying to work out what this was. What's the platelets, what's the plasma, what's the white cells, blood cells. Anyway, so because we had to sign blood cards on behalf of our children, and that's something, when you're talking about your own life, that's one thing. When you're talking about your own child's life, that's a very different issue. So you have to understand what this is in order to, if there's a treatment they can have, if they need it, and we're ignorant, and we don't know what we're signing here. They could lose their lives, and we could have allowed them to have something that's allowed in order to save their lives. So it's
Cora, can I just on a point of information here, in case everyone's not clear, Jehovah's Witnesses are not allowed blood transfusions because of a scripture in the Bible that says you can't eat blood. There's one in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament, and they've interpreted that to say, well, you can't take it into your body in any way. Obviously, the technology of transfusions was not around for ancient Israelites, but for some reason, they've just extended that. I suspect they regret it, and I suspect if they could take it back, they would, because so many people have lost their lives, but they're just too proud to do that now. Because what does it say if your child has died, and many children have, and then they say, oh, actually, don't worry about that? There'll be so many lawsuits, so they can't really retract.
Exactly.
But occasionally they sort of say, oh, you can't have blood transfusion, but you can have a blood fraction now, or you can't have this, but you can have that. So that's just to fill everybody in case you're getting lost there.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cora, continue.
No, that's fine. Mark looked into the medical facts of what these fractions of fractions were, and it started to make you realise that actually it's still blood, no matter how you dissect it. It's a ham sandwich. No matter how you have that ham, so whether you have the bread separate, the ham separate, the butter separate, the lettuce, whatever, it still makes a ham sandwich. So the same with the blood, when that means they're having blood, and also things like leukemia, cancer treatments, and white blood cells are carried in the breast milk when you're breastfeeding. So you're basically transferring, and the baby's eating one of the things you're not allowed to have to save your life. So he then comes up to the kitchen one day and says to me, I said, well, I'm washing up, and he says to me, we have to do these blood cards. And I said, well, I said, we have to do these blood cards. And he said to me, I'm not going to sign them. If my child needs blood, I'm going to allow them to have blood. And my whole world just went crash. And I turned round, and I looked at him, and I went, what?
Do you know what the gravity of that situation was? Just by saying, I, as husband to my wife, was not going to sign these blood cards, which I now saw as death cards for my children, potential death cards. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. But I took a very careful decision because I knew what was coming next. This could have finished my marriage quite easily.
What he didn't realise was coming next was a plate that just missed him by inches.
But then she said,
very cross.
So you're telling me, hands on hips, I'll never forget, she's quite terrifying when she's angry. And she said, you're not going to allow our children to remain free from blood? And I said, darling, they're already having blood.
And that made me think, because our younger son had a tetanus jab not long before, and that also has fractions in it, one of which you're not allowed. So he said, well, Bren's had one, or he can't have it because he's just had a tetanus jab. I said, what do you mean? Which made me start thinking. When Mark started to show me the medical reasons why, that really kind of just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I said, well, if that's the case, and they're saying you can't have blood and you can't have these fractions and that all these people have died, like you said, Deborah, mothers, fathers, sons, brothers, children, they've allowed all this, they're blood guilty. And I just lost
My father nearly died from not having a blood transfusion when I was a child. And I remember my mum collapsing on the hospital floor, holding me as a child. I was about 4, and I can still remember it. where the doctor said he's going to die. He had a burst stomach ulcer. So my uncle died of a burst stomach ulcer in exactly the same scenario. So it's a passionate subject for us. It's a massive contradiction. Many people are losing their lives even today because of this particular dogma that they go through. And they believe, and this is what's so tragic about this, that God wants that to happen, that they are somehow fundamentally pleasing God by allowing this temporary life that they've got to pass away, and that God is happy with that. Now, when you come out and you wake up and you can actually see what's going on here, you realise this is a massive, massive error on their part. And as Deborah said, this is a governance issue now.
But then that started us to, well, Mark started to look into other things, and I was just letting him feed me the information. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, you're almost forced to study a lot about, study the Watchtower, study the Bible, do this, do that. And I pioneered, and I hated study, absolutely hated it. I was in school up until my first year of senior school, and I was then taught at home for the rest of my adult, child life and senior life. So my education stopped at the age of 12 when it came to academic. So I had to play catch up, but it's okay because the new systems come in soon, and it doesn't matter because you don't need any of that. Just go to pioneering. So I went straight into pioneering once I was baptised at the age of 15. And so I let other people give me information. I kind of wait till they make a film, and then I watch the film. I don't like picking up a book and reading it, but I never started reading as much as I did when I started to realise what Mark was saying, and things he was reading. He'd pass it to me, and I'd start to read the information as well. And then we started watching YouTube videos, and we were watching people talking about their experiences as Jehovah's Witnesses, people in America, and we would sit there on a Sunday morning in bed with a cup of tea watching a video that somebody made about their experience, and then we'd go to the Kingdom Hall and put our hands up in the Watchtower, and it just seemed to be really strange that we were doing this, but we were waking up and we didn't realise. And then it came to 2011, and we turned around and we just thought, can't do it anymore. Mark was going to more and more meetings just without me to represent the family because I just had no interest. And then you said, that's it.
We went on the ministry for our last time,
children.
And we were halfway through a street, and we looked at each other and we said,
let's go home.
What are we doing? And she said, do you want to go home? And I said, yeah, come on. And that was it. That was it.
Do you know, funnily, there's a scene like that in The Simpsons where they're waiting for someone to try out their new doorbell, and they're sitting there waiting, and some Jehovah's Witnesses come up the path, and they think, oh, brilliant. And then it's a couple like you, and one of them turns to the other and says, shall we just go and get a proper job? And they throw the Watchtower away and walk away, and they're like, oh, damn it.
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah. It's basically you were the couple in The Simpsons. The comedy Jehovah's Witnesses in The Simpsons.
But I want the blue hair. That's basically what happened, and we did a resignation. We told our family we were going to be resigning.
Oh, you properly resigned?
Oh, yes. We've been through so much pain, it didn't bother us anymore. No. We were so burnt.
If you can imagine, all of our family are Jehovah's Witnesses. So this is a point where I'm now telling my mum, my dad, my grandmother, my uncle, my auntie, my brother, all my cousins that we're no longer, and we said, nothing's changed. We love you as a family. We're not going anywhere, but we are no longer wanting to be known as Jehovah's Witnesses. We are leaving. We are resigning. We were told to fade. Don't put a resignation in because we can't talk to you anymore. If you do that, we won't be able to associate with you. We said, well, we're not going to live a lie. So I'm sorry, but we are actually going to say we don't want anything to do with this. Yeah. So we handed in our resignations letters. And from that point, the elders went around every single member of our family saying you can no longer have any association with...
They made appointments with every member, and eventually they were all dreading the visit, and then they were told, you do not greet them in the street, you do not smile at them, you do not discuss anything with them, they're dead to you.
I had cards off my grandmother, my uncle, and my cousin. My uncle and my cousin could do it because they were elders, and you're allowed to send things if you're an elder because there's a loophole. And it basically said, my uncle said, thanks for showing us a great holiday cottage, and we will be going back, but I can't have any association with you from this point onwards.
Thanks for showing us a great holiday cottage.
Yeah.
What a weird kiss-off letter. By the way, that Airbnb was fabulous. Yeah. I'm never speaking to you again.
Yeah, basically. And my cousins was contact me if it's an emergency, but not if it's anything else. And that was it. And my mum basically had breast cancer when we were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'd gone to every appointment with her and everything with that, and she went into remission. And then obviously we're now telling her that we're not going to be Jehovah's Witnesses anymore. And the following year, she had lung and liver cancer, and obviously up to that point hadn't spoken to her, she hadn't spoken to me, and I then wanted to be with her on all of her appointments, as I had been when I was a witness. And she told me she didn't need me to go with her, and that she's had everybody that she needed to go with her, and all of her appointments were organised. She died shunning me and her grandchildren and our family back in 2012 at the end of that year, so a year from when we'd resigned. And the funeral was horrendous. My auntie actually passed away or died at the beginning of this year, and I had a phone call to tell me, but no one told me when the funeral was. And that was her sister. So it's kind of that whole shunning, ostracism type thing. It really does exist.
Shunning is extremely real.
It's very real, and
it's
day
to death.
to day.
It is to
It
death.
is to death.
If they could legally stone us, they would.
They would. Yeah.
That, I think that's really where it's at, isn't it? It's just, it's so painful for people as well. And I've been very lucky in that, in some ways, and not others, but it's so painful and so real. I recently had New Year's Eve with some friends who've just left. It was their second ever New Year's Eve out, and it was amazing because they didn't know the words to Auld Lang Syne. So they sung them, they were raised in it. So we were all old acquaintances, they were like, be forgotten. But they're being shunned by family, and it's just so painful. Like, you live with the pain all the time. That the only people in the world really that have to unconditionally love you are your mum and your dad. And your mum, you've actually kind of come out of her if you've been raised by your biological mother. You've actually come out of her. She's made you of her body. So it's exquisitely painful to be shunned by your mother, and highly unnatural. Yeah. And it's painful for the mothers, and it's painful for the children, no matter which way around the shunning goes.
And also for the grandchildren, because my mother, having been in a single sister state when my daughter was born, my mum was the first one to touch her. My mum had a very intricate relationship with my daughter.
Does she? Why do they shun the grandchildren? I don't understand that, because the grandchildren, it's not their fault. Yeah. And actually, I know someone who uses the loophole, well, if I see my grandchildren, I'll be a good influence on them, and if they then want to come to Jehovah, they can. So she loopholes and sees her daughter on that basis as a part of a conscience matter. I found it really bizarre that people would shun their grandchildren. Did the society expect that? I don't know that the society expect that. Do they? There's people, someone there's going, it's a conscience matter. I think it depends on your local elders, actually, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Your mother sees your children, but not you. So, do you arrange drop-offs and things?
No, she would want that. There be some risk of contact.
Some risk of a viral infection. You would. So she phones your wife, who was not a Jehovah's Witness and therefore is not unclean, even though she's worldly. I mean, it's just extraordinary, isn't it? It's like a superstition, actually. And they think they're not superstitious, but I think it's like a superstition, that if they touch you, they'll be infected by demons. It's true, though. Well, your story is extraordinary, even by Jehovah's Witness standards, in my opinion, with your whole sort of marrying and then what do they do with you, because you married without the express permission of 2 plumbers, an electrician and a window washer who live near you. I mean, it's just bizarre. Nothing wrong with any of those jobs, but I just don't want those people telling me who I can date or how short my skirt can be. Marc and Cora, thank you for sharing with us. It was a lot, and some of it was quite emotional, and you were very honest and open, and it's a big thing to talk about, especially when it involves your marriage and your children. So I'd like to thank Marc and Cora very much.